Aisyah binti Muhammad Hatta, and I'm presenting for the introduction part. Do you know what personal financing is? I'm pretty sure that most people know what personal financing is. Personal financing, or known as personal loan, is money borrowed from a bank lender and repaid over a defined period of time with interest. Many banks provide fixed rate, which is interest rate stay the same during the loan terms, or variable rate. Interest rate fluctuate throughout the loan's term. Personal loan interest rate vary per application and are determined by the borrower's credit score. If the borrower make a late payment for the loan, the bank has the power to charge additional interest to the amount that they borrowed. So, what is the purpose for some people to apply for it? There are a lot of reasons or purposes why someone applies for personal financing. The common reason why most of the people apply for it is because there are some people that use the money as a model of their business, for a grand wedding reception, or some people apply to pay for their parents' medical expenses that acquire a huge amount of money. However, in Islamic transaction, we have Islamic personal financing. There are some differences between Islamic personal financing and conventional personal financing. In terms of financing profit, in Islamic personal financing, the bank buys an asset on behalf of the borrowers and sell it at a profit rate. This profit rate replaces the interest rate that is used by the conventional personal financing. And for conventional personal financing, the bank uses the interest rate, which is the amount of the interest rate due per period as a proportion of the amount borrowed. In terms of type of contract, Islamic personal financing uses card method, where an act of lending without interest in the form of liability to the borrower, while the conventional personal financing uses the loan agreement that is typically include covenants, value of collateral involved, guarantees, interest rate terms, and the duration over which it must be repaid. In terms of monthly payment, Islamic personal financing put a fixed payment rate, which means the borrower will pay a fixed amount to the bank every month until the end of the contract, while conventional personal financing puts fixed and floating rate, which means the terms fixed and flat rates are sometimes used interchangeably, but their exact meanings differ. In Malaysia, a flat rate can be understood as the amount to be paid back every month, whereas the fixed rate is the interest rate applied over the loan terms. In terms of the payment, Islamic personal financing charge gharamah. Gharamah is a penalty imposed as a precautionary measure for late payment by the debtor, while conventional personal financing will charge a penalty where the bank charge a percentage-wise penalty, generally require defaulters to pay up to 2% extra of the outstanding amount for each default month. Lastly, business scope. Islamic personal financing is a Sharia-compliant activity, while conventional personal financing, legal but non-Sharia compliant activity.
Now, we move to the current banking product in the bank, which is Buy Al-Ina. For the definition, the word Al-Buy literally means the exchange of something with something else. It is the opposite of word Al-Shira or purchase. However, the word Al-Buy also used to carry the meaning of Al-Shira. Al-Buy in terms of Sharia is elaborated in exchange from property with other property through certain procedures, or the process of exchanging a favored item for something equivalent in a certain way that is perfect. Technically, Buy Al-Ina refers to a contract involving the seller's sale and subsequent purchase of an asset. In this deal, the seller sells an item to the buyer for cash, then purchases the asset back at a higher deferred price than the cash sale price. It may also occur when the seller sells the asset to the buyer for a deferred price and then repurchases the item for cash at a price lower than the deferred sale price. In addition, for the bank's financing under Buy Al-Ina, the bank will sell the assets such as land owned by the bank or another asset indicated by the bank to the client at a deferred selling price. Next, the relations between personal financing and Buy Al-Ina. Repurchase or Buy Al-Ina based personal financing utilized by Islamic banks. When a bank purchases a commodity from its client on a spot basis and resells it to the customer at a cost plus price and on a deferred basis, A murbaha financing can be transformed into al-bay'inah financing if the vendor is the same as the client. In this instance, the profit is identical to riba, which is prohibited in conventional personal loans. For instance, when an Islamic bank sells an asset to a customer on a deferred basis and then repurchases the asset on a cash basis at a lower price than the delayed price, then the validity of buy al-inah contract, according to Shafi'i, buy al-inah transactions are permissible but odious and do not contain riba, uncertainty or gambling. Their justification is that the buy al-inah contract meets all the requirements for a valid agreement. The purpose of the parties has no bearing on the legality of the transaction. The goal is not considered because there is no way to determine it unless it is stated openly. In the Shafi'i and Zahir school of fiqh, only the exterior intent of contracting parties is taken into account. Thus, buy al-inah is permissible according to the verse, Allah has permitted the selling and buy but prohibited interest. They do not address the succession of two contracts of sale as adequate proof of ribawi purpose. However, according to Maliki, Hanafi and Hanbali, the contract is invalid, forbidden and impermissible since such a transaction constitutes riba or shubahah, both of which are prohibited under the Islamic law. They argue that the form of contracts of sale in ba'i are nothing but a legal device or a legal fiction, or also known as hilah, to legalize what is intrinsically illegal according to the Sharia, as they classify ba'i its essence as a loan with interest. In other words, they claim that the ba'i contracts are nothing more than a hilah to legalize what is intrinsically forbidden by Sharia. Furthermore, in Malaysia, Bank Rakyat implements the buy al-inah principle on an instrument that offers instant cash facilities to its clients. The application of this principle is approved by the Advisory Council Shariah of Bank Rakyat and the Securities Commission based on the Al-Shafi'i School and the Al-Zahiri School. Financing products under this buy al-inah concept are reported to have received a high demand from members of the community compared with loan based on other Sharia concepts such as BBA, Arahnu and so on. An increase in response of this buy al-inah product is driven by the factor of freedom of spending, as well managing finances entirely in the hands of the customer as opposed to the products where the borrower is bound to withdraw money on a regular basis, stage or conditional that limits the freedom to spend. And for how they implement it, under this principle, Bank Rakyat will sell its assets or property to customers at a deferred price. Then, the bank will make repurchase of the property from the customer at a cash price. By using buy al-inah concept of buying and selling, customers will earn cash and repay his debt to the bank in installments within a period of time agreed by both parties. The profit margin of the bank is based on the difference between the cash price and the deferred price. The percentage of profits that is charged is different based on the agreed deferral period collectively. In addition, the profit percentage is flexible and varies from time to time. The assets sold are the property of Bank Rakyat and the value of the asset is equal to the amount requested by the customer. While the types of assets that are usually used by Bank Rakyat in this contract, whether the building belongs to the Bank Rakyat, which is the part of the immovable building that has been identified as levels, blocks or lots of building, or a computer which complete with its accessories, or Amanah Raya Development ARD share certificate. Next, we move to the modus operandi of buy al-inah in personal financing. The following is a breakdown of the buy al-inah personal financing modus operandi. The customer initiates contact with the Islamic bank for funding. The bank then identifies the asset to be traded under the buy al-inah contract. The Islamic bank then sells the asset to the customer at a selling price on deferred conditions and transfers ownership to the customer. In addition, the bank and the client sign second sales and purchase agreement in which the bank repurchases the asset sold to the customer at cost and pays cash. Finally, the customer begins to pay his bank installment.
There are some elements in Bai al-Ina that should be improved. The first issue is Bai al-Ina has the existence of the element of force. According to the Islamic transaction, there should not exist any element of force in the transaction because both of the parties should have the freedom of choice in the transaction of the sale or purchase, while in the Bai al-Ina contract, the buyer is forced to agree with the condition applied. One of the clear rules is that no party is allowed to force any person to purchase the asset and must be free, and the buyers also must be free to sell it to anybody. Besides, there are two contracts involved in Bai al-Ina, which are purchase and sale contract. Thus, every contract that is involved in Bai al-Ina transaction must follow the proper order of the akad process. The second issue is there are some opinions supporting that Bai al-Ina is prohibited, especially the issue of the existence riba in this transaction. Actually, the development role of Islamic banking and finance is not fairly different from its conventional counterparts. Both of the financial intermediaries are serving to assemble saving from the surplus sector and conducting a credit allocation function to the deficit sector. Bai al-Ina has left any issue related with its transaction, particularly about the existence of riba. Some fuqaha have different opinion on this transaction, particularly that al-Ina has inherent riba and is an unlawful transaction. Hence, Bai al-Ina is considered as the back door of riba. The Shafi'i school of thought, on the other hand, did not simply accept Bai al-Ina transaction. One obvious criterion is that no party may compel anybody to repurchase the item, and they must be free to sell it to anyone. The rate of profit in this case is distinguishable from prohibited riba in a conventional personal loan. In this contract, there is an economic interest for both parties, which is the lender and the borrower, which at the same time circumvents the prohibition of riba or usury. The personal financing used by the Islamic bank based on the repurchase of Bai al-Ina. In Malaysia, Bai al-Ina has been offered through its application in Islamic banking, which has left many issues, particularly about the existence of riba and illegal transaction, violate the Sharia itself. And the third issue is the issue of akad, whereby the purchaser signed two contracts without completing the first contract. The first akad must be accomplished first, followed by the second agreement. According to the Sharia regulation, the first agreement must be signed by both contractual parties, who are the bank and the client, to complete the first agreement, followed by the second agreement, as well as the ijab and qabul procedure. This means that the first akad, which can be either purchase or sale, must be finished first, followed by the second akad. Hence, by referring to the current situation to ensure that the Bai al-Ina contract follows all the terms and conditions as well as the requirements imposed by the Shafi'i school of thought. Bank Negara Malaysia has also issued guidelines and the circular pertaining to the Bai al-Ina contract, and because of this issue that have been violated the Sharia of Islam, we have decided to make an improvement by applying Tawarruk method for Islamic personal financing. Tawarruk financial financing will be explained more further by Hani and Danny.
Bai al-Tawarruk is the solution that we choose to improve the personal financing. Before we go further, let me explain generally about Bai al-Tawarruk. Bai al-Tawarruk is a form of buying and selling with the aim of earning cash. It involves the purchase of an item on a deferred basis, and then the item is sold in cash at a lower price. Then, the first purchase to a third party where the third party is not the original seller. According to the top Saudi scholar, Abdullah Sulaiman Al-Mani explains that Tawarruk is the act of a person who needs money to fulfill his desires by avoiding the practice of riba. However, Bai al-Tawarruk is a sale and purchase involving three or more parties. Why is it called al-tawaru? This is because when a person buys an item, he does not intend to use or take advantage of it. In fact, it is meant to make and earn money. Sharia ruling on buy al-tawaru is permissible as long as the three sales transactions within the tawaru meet the Sharia requirements. But how to ensure that the sales in tawaru observe the Sharia requirements? This is true. Every sale in tawaru is properly executed and documented as proof that the commodity exists, transfer of ownership, takeover of ownership, and other requirements. Next, for the scholars that permitted by al-tawaru can be seen by the Sharia resolution of Islamic finance issued by Bank Negara Malaysia (BNM) has decided that personal financing using the concept of tawaru is permissible. This is because, first one, the scholars argue that tawaru is allowed because it is classified as a buying and selling activity based on the word of Allah Subhanahu wa Ta'ala in the Quran in Surah Al-Baqarah verse 257. That is, Allah allows trading and forbids usury. The second one is the views of current scholars allow the concept of al-tawaru based on the views among the Hanafi, Hanbali, and Shafi'i schools that allow the use of al-tawaru. The last one, through the several studies that we made, it is also argued that tawaru is useful Sharia concept in helping Islamic banking institutions offer financing to individuals. There are several banks that changed the concept in personal financing from Bayalina to Al-Tawaru. One of the banks is Bank Muamalat Malaysia Berhad (BMMB). Bank Muamalat Malaysia Berhad (BMMB) is one of the banks that replaced their personal financing product contracts from Bayalina to Bay Al-Tawaru. This Tawaru-based personal financing product was approved by the BMMB Sharia Committee on 6 December 2006. This is an initiative or initial step taken by the BMMB to get out of the use of the Bay al-Ina. Why? This is because the contract has a lot of controversy. However, Bank Negara Malaysia (BNM) has outlined some very strict conditions on the Bay al-Ina contract. So, as a fully Islamic banking institution, BMMB has decided to discontinue the offering of Bay al-Ina based personal financing products and has replaced it with the Bay al-Tawaru contract. As you can see here, this is the modus operandi a personal financing according to Bay al-Tawaru contract. So the first one is the customer apply for a financing product which is personal financing on tawaru from the bank. The next step is the bank will buy the commodity from the broker one. Then the bank sells the commodity to the customer at the bank sale price based on the deferred payment terms. Next, the customer requests the bank to act as the customer agent to sell the commodity in the market. Then the bank acts as the sales agent appointed by the customer and sells the commodity to the broker too. Then, the bank credits the customer account with the return of the proceeds of the sale of the commodity. The last one is the customer pays the amount to be paid to the bank through an agreed installment method.
Moreover, the advantages of the proposal compared to the current tawaru has been considered in a significantly more favorable light than by al-Inah, at least by the majority of past and some modern Islamic jurists. It is one of the prominent Sharia contracts that have been recently dominated Islamic finance. Nonetheless, the establishment of banking tawaruk demonstrates the concern and acknowledgement by some jurists worldwide of the necessity to find alternate solutions to the liquidity crisis that Muslims face globally. Furthermore, as tawarruk includes a third party and there is no requirement for underlying selling object to be returned or resold to the original owner, which is the first seller in tawarruk transactions. The seller is able to obtain liquidity without engaging in usury. Lastly, tawarruk may help to achieve liquidity as it can be implemented in many other transactions.
So, in conclusion, the bayar tawarruk principle has been applied in Islamic banking products in Malaysia, including personal financing product. The use of bayar tawarruk principle in personal financing has given a new perception to Islamic financing in Malaysia because the bayar-lina principle has been much disputed by outsiders, especially scholars from the Middle East. However, bayar tawarruk is really needed and should be introduced into the market in Malaysia. Why? This is because tawarruk promotes a better Islamic banking practices, but it must meet and fulfill the condition or transactions and tricks stated in the Quran and Sunnah. So that's all from us. Thank you.